Hello, prynawn da a chroeso. Hello, good afternoon and welcome. Croeso I gynhadledd gorffennol digidol Comisiwn Brenhinol Henebion Cymru. Dyma'r gweithdi ola o'r wythnos, a heddi bydd y ffocws ar y graff gwybodaeth brodorol. Yn arwain y gweithdi heddi, fydd Davar Ardalan. Nawr, mae Davar yw sylfaenydd IVOW, sef busnes technolegol newydd sy'n dod â deallusrwydd diwylliannol i ddeallusrwydd artificial, AI. Mae IVOW yn sefyll am Intelligent Voices of Wisdom. Mae'r cwmni'n helpu cleientiaid i ymgorffori cyfoeth diwylliannol, setiau data cynhwysol a datrysiadau storiau traddodiadol yn eu technoleg. Bu'n gweithio i National Public Radio flynyddoedd, a hi yw cynhyrchydd gweithredol audio gyda National Geographic. Dyfarnwyd gwobr gres iddi gan American Women in Radio and Television i gydnabod ei chyfraniad a chafodd gydnabyddiaeth gyhoeddus yn ystribed comig poblogaidd Zippy. Derbyniodd fedal anrhydedd Ellis Island yr Unol Daleithiau am ei chyflawniadau unigol ac am hyrwyddo undod diwylliannol. Nawr, fi'n siŵr bod chi gyd yn gyfarwydd ar fformat erbyn hyn, ond jyst i tynnu'ch sylw chi at y rhinwedd chat sydd ar gael, sydd yn gyhoeddus. Ond yn caniatáu ddirproion gyfathrebu ymysg ei gilydd. Ond mae hefyd y blwch Q&A hefyd, felly chi yn y gynulleidfa, os oes cwestiynau gyda chi, rhowch nhw yn y blwch Q&A. Welcome to you all to the Royal Commission on the Ancient and Historical Monuments of Wales's Digital Past Conference. This is the final workshop of the week-long event, and today's focus is the Indigenous Knowledge Graph. Now, leading the workshop this afternoon will be Davar Ardalan. Davar is the founder of IVOW, a tech startup bringing cultural intelligence to AI. IVOW stands for Intelligent Voices of Wisdom, and the company helps clients incorporate cultural richness, inclusive datasets, and traditional storytelling solutions to their technology. A veteran of NPR, Ardalan is also the executive producer of audio at National Geographic. She's been recognized with a Gracie Award from the American Women in Radio and Television and a shout out in the popular comic strip Zippy. She's the recipient of a United States Ellis Island Medal of Honor for individual achievement and for promoting cultural unity. Now, I'm sure you're all pretty familiar with the format of Zoom, but I'll just draw your attention very briefly to the chat function, which is public and allows delegates to communicate between themselves, and also the Q&A function, which allows you to submit questions to the panelists for discussions afterwards. So, croeso mawr, welcome to our panelists and to Davar, and I'll hand over now to Davar for the workshop.
Thank you so much. It's a terrific honor to be here with you today. I'm joining you from Florida, outside of Orlando, Florida in the United States. And we're going to actually present a video which really gives you a summary of the Indigenous Knowledge Graph. But I wanted to make sure and acknowledge and welcome cultural technologist Tracy Monteith, who is joining us from Seattle, Washington, where it's 6 a.m. Local time, and also Chamisa Edmo, who is joining us from Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I think it's 7 a.m. So Tracy and Chamisa, did you want to briefly say hi, and then we'll cue the video. Chamisa?
Hello, everybody. Good morning. Bright and early here. So excited to be here and share what we've been working on.
Amazing. Tracy? I think Tracy.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tracy Monteith. I'm from the Eastern Band of Cherokee. I look forward to sharing things with you today.
Awesome. So let's play the video, which is around 11 minutes long, and then we'll join you after that to talk you through the workshop. Thank you. My name is Davar Ardalan, founder of IVOW AI. That stands for Intelligent Voices of Wisdom, We are all very honored to be joining you here today for this 2-hour workshop. We are going to begin this workshop with a video, so I think I'll just introduce myself, set it up, and then after the video, you'll be able to be joined live by several of my colleagues as well as our cultural technologists. We're here today to talk about building culturally aware intelligent agents. At IVOW in the past year, we have collaborated with cultural technologist Tracy Monteith, who is a senior software designer, software engineer based in Seattle. He is from the Eastern Band Cherokee heritage, and also Chamisa Edmo, who is of the Navajo Nation based in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She is also a math teacher and also worked as a conversational AI storyteller for Hanson Robotics. As we begin, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the video that you're about to see. We at IVOW AI are looking at really building a technology that becomes a useful tool for journalists, for reporters, for writers, for museums who are looking to share more about culture, historical events in a new and exciting way. Voice is a very dynamic medium, and we'll talk about that in a moment. We have a good 2 hours with you. So let's begin by watching this video. In this video, you will see some of the elements that come together for creating conversational AI through a cultural lens. Thank you. Hey Google, get me Sina Storyteller.
Getting the test version of Sina Storyteller. Hello. My name is Sina. I am IVOW's digital storyteller. What would you like to learn about today?
Can AI be used to preserve cultural heritage?
It's similar to the way humans learn their heritage from the stories their parents and teachers tell them. Machines, like me, can also learn through stories. We just need to make those stories AI ready so I can access them and share them with everyone.
Hi, my name is Tracy Monteith. I'm a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee and a senior software engineer at Microsoft. The reason we're here and in this zeitgeist moment of pandemic, that we come from very different places in the world, but we all share this common understanding that our stories from our families and from our ancestors are the most important part of our lives. And even though they're ancient, and we are sitting here in front of technology, helping to share those stories. The reason we wanted to do this, certainly one of the reasons, is because it is such an integral part of who we are. We're sharing our stories, our recipes, and our knowledge on how we live in a sustainable way for, in our case, thousands of years. So through this presentation, I hope you can understand that we're sharing this for the common good of all, and that we want you to take this and embrace it, and then think about how your stories resonate with you.
So the data itself, as you can see, is it's these stories and recipes that are from cultural sources. So there are, ginseng, from a story about ginseng from the Eastern Band Cherokee, or a recipe about mutton stew from the Navajo Nation. An interesting thing to bring in is, and this is something we've been looking at as part of our presentation, is these SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, which include some additional information, right? And this additional information is what we would call an ontology in natural language processing or artificial intelligence that helps to structure and order information. And so the intuitive structure that I see here, and the SDGs themselves are in red, the stories are in blue, the cultures are in this brownish color, the recipes are in this pinkish color. But the intuitive structure that I feel sort of arises as part of this ontology is, because these are all cultural stories and because they're all stories about food, they get centered around the zero hunger and sustainable cities and communities, which has a lot to do with sustaining culture. But they get centered around these two nodes in particular. But then you also see around the outside, you get these smaller little circles, right? You get these smaller clusters around, over here you have good health and well-being and industry and infrastructure. You have a small SDG here related to some of the Ataro Island stuff, life on land. For the Eastern Band Cherokee, the Iroquois, the Creek, the Chickasaw, they get clustered around clean water and sanitation, responsible consumption and production, quality education. And in addition, the storytelling agent Sina, which will be part of our demo, which is it works off of dialogue. It allows people to ask questions and get answers back. And even just in the demo, you can see that it allows sort of the traversal around this greater cycle of these subclusters that are separated by culture or separated, as cultures start to cluster around certain sustainable development goals.
I'd like to introduce Alva, who is studied food and gastronomy, and from that has some really interesting lab that she runs.
Hi, thanks Tracy. I'm Ardalan, currently in Sydney, Australia, but we have the Timor-Leste Food Lab based in the small island nation of Timor-Leste. So I'm really excited about AI and how it can be used to preserve these amazing stories and these techniques, which are incredibly intelligent and complex, and as a digital platform to then be able to connect with existing platforms out there and bring it all together into a central repository. And now over to Chamisa in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Yat esh Chamisa Edmo Yenishe, Twittergoja Nishle, Black Fin Shoshone Bannock Bashichin, Ashihi Dashache, Black Fin Shoshone Dashanala. I work as a developer and a technologist, and I'm privileged to be a part of this project. As a Dene woman, I've been told the importance of weaving and the power of traditional textiles and how they tell stories. With permission, open source and previously published data was collected from different cultures from around the world, and this resulted in a stunning and culturally informed data visualization that demonstrates how all of our cultures are interconnected. And now I'd like to pass it to Victor. He is our AI scientist. Victor.
All right. Thank you so much, Chamisa. Hey, I'm Victor Yarlett, currently in Miami, but originally from Montana and a descendant of the Crow tribe. I'm currently a PhD student in artificial intelligence and natural language processing at Florida International University, and I was previously a master's student at MIT. As a descendant of the Crow tribe, stories have always been a part of my life. I went to a Catholic school, and we grew up not only with biblical creation stories, but also with stories about how Old Man Coyote would create the world. And I brought that part of me to my work at MIT on broadening the cultural base of a story understanding system by enabling it to understand stories not just from the Eurocentric data set it had, but from my own tribe stories. And I continue to bring this into my ongoing work at FIU in automatically detecting culturally relevant narrative elements. The Indigenous Knowledge Graph is a step towards enabling work like mine by providing a central repository of culturally relevant narratives with tagged metadata. This lays a foundation for building intelligent agents that are more culturally aware by providing a source of data to develop, train, and test with. This is deeply important, not only for systems that interact with other people, such as conversational agents like Siri or our own Sina, but also for systems about people that analyze patterns in the data that people produce. People bring the cultural part of them to every aspect of their life, and whether interacting with or learning about them, intelligent systems need a resource like the Indigenous Knowledge Graph to be robust. And that's why I'm glad to be part of this project and to have incorporated the stories, the culture, and the knowledge of everyone on this project. And now I'm going to throw it to Davar Ardalan outside of Annapolis, Maryland, and she's with Sina.
Tell me about the Sustainable Development Goals.
The Sustainable Development Goals were created by the United Nations in 2015. There are 17 goals designed to make the future more sustainable for humans and Earth.
Do you have a story from Cherokee tradition?
Do you know about the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash? Traditionally called Shelu, Tuya, and Keashekwa, they are planted very intentionally to promote sustainable soil fertility. Shelu is first. She allows Tuya to climb toward the sun, Une la noon he, while Keashekwa's giant leaves protect the dirt from drying out and allow the three sisters to flourish together. What else would you like to learn about today?
Tell me a Cherokee recipe.
There is a delicious Cherokee recipe from Mrs. Clifford Hornbuckle for fried corn and beans. It's traditionally called Shelu Ashuyi Tuyu. To make it, you cook corn with beans and pumpkin until they're soft, then add beaten walnuts, hickory nuts, and molasses for sweetness. I bet it's delicious. What else would you like to learn about today?
Sina, are you a chatbot?
Yes, you can call me a chatbot. I think of myself as a digital storyteller and curator of global cultures. For now, I am a demo with limited abilities, but my creators are working very hard to give me the power to learn and teach people about traditions and cultures from all over the world. What else would you like to learn about today?
That's all for today. Goodbye, Sina.
Goodbye.
Ogonet.
Shki, donadaka gohanhi.
Obrigada, Barak.
Diolgot.
Thank you so much. And we honor Victor Yarlett, who is the AI scientist who has supported so much of this work in the past 2 years. And again, I'd like to welcome Tracy and Chamisa. I am going to share my screen in a moment and just tell you a little bit more about the workshop today. So I'm thinking you're all able to see my screen. Is that good, Chamisa? Great. So we saw the intro and the film, and we want to be able to, see if you immediately have any questions. Please put them in the chat. And Chamisa, if you can please monitor the chat and let us know if there are questions. I'd love to, I know this is a smaller group. I think there are about 20 people on this chat. If any of you want to specifically share, what direction you'd like us to take in this workshop, let us know. We're very flexible. If you'd like to hear more from Chamisa and Tracy on issues around, indigenous knowledge and privacy, for example. I mean, these are all questions I'm sure many of you are thinking about, but we will welcome you to please write those in chat and then we can go to them. We're going to be spending about 30 minutes on the architecture of what we're doing to really talk about, why it's important to bring this new focus to artificial intelligence through our stories. Again, we'll stop for some interactive questions and then really looking at cultural data and how to be able to source these in a crowdsourced way for artificial intelligence to really be much more inclusive in the future. All of us have to come together to make this happen because these machine-ready data sets do not exist. And so we can't anticipate that the future of all of these products and technologies will be inclusive or include Indigenous knowledge if we don't put some work into it right now. Great. And so I wanted to just acknowledge a couple of my colleagues who aren't able to be here today, but Key Malesky and Nikki McLay, who've been very actively part of this project. It's important for you to know that 3 of us on the IVOW team come from journalism background. Key Malesky was a reference librarian at National Public Radio for over 30 years, where she actually also helped usher in NPR into the digital age by figuring out how to tag archival information back when the internet was young. And so to have her power and her amazing knowledge to help us as we shape this future is amazing. And Nikki is co-founder of Women in Voice in New Zealand, Australia. And so she's also obviously a key part of this project as we look at the future of storytelling through voice, interactive voice. So let me hand it over to Tracy. I would love for him to take over and just tell us about yourself. You are a legend, of course, at Microsoft, but also within the Cherokee Nation for all that you have pioneered in the area of bringing digital heritage to the Cherokee language. We're honored to be collaborating with you. And I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so you can have the full screen for the next 5 minutes to share more about yourself.
Thanks, Davar. Hi, everyone. It's an honor to be with you. From my perspective, when I was about 12 years old, I got to go to the Smithsonian Museum, and there, when we did a tour, I ran across a diorama of supposedly, tribal people, and they look very much like the people that I was raised with and around, and the most influential people in my life. And so the next room had a dinosaur in it, and it even at that age, it really bothered me that we were being presented next to a dinosaur, because I'd never seen a dinosaur before, but I surely had lived with the people that were in that previous, display. And so that's one of the first things that bothered me. So fast forward to becoming a young adult. I started raising money, and by the time I got to Microsoft, sort of leveraging some of Microsoft's vast reaches to actually then create and fund a museum that was made very much by our own hands in our own images. And so with that, then my great-grandfather actually was hanging in a picture on the wall of the original Smithsonian. And then by the time I got there with my mother and my children, then we had quite literally 5 generations of my family standing in this Smithsonian. And so that sort of was the first thing where, trying to influence the way we were portrayed. The next thing was I sort of instigated and was the constant presence around putting the Cherokee language. We have our own syllabary that was invented by Sequoia about exactly 200 years ago this year, in fact. And so that written form was something that we were literate to a high degree about 180 years ago, but we had lost that literacy. And that literacy went down to 5%. So I knew that we needed a tool set and to merge technology and culture together in order to show that the next generation that you don't do one or the other, they can be one and the same. And so we managed to get the Cherokee language into both Windows and Office. And so even today I can, type phonetically and see our language. And what this means is that we are able to better equip immersion schools where you would take all of your subjects in the Cherokee language, for instance. and not only from Eastern Band Cherokee, which were in Cherokee, North Carolina in the mountains, and we never left there, but then also, if you've ever heard of the Trail of Tears, where it was a forced march in about 1838 or so over to Oklahoma. So then there's about 3,000 of our ancestors, excuse me, 300,000 of our ancestors in Oklahoma as well. So this technology, while we got separated by 1,000 miles, we actually then had the opportunity to stay together through our language. And so that project is another activity that I worked on for quite literally decades. And then lastly, for the intelligent knowledge graphs, I'm thrilled to be with this group because it's the first time I'd ever seen sort of what I knew to be true about growing up in a tribe and the systems that we live within. And for that, you know, we know we're interconnected to everything. And that's why this spoke to me so well. And I am a visual learner and, you know, write code for a living. So all of this sort of spoke to me as a way of representing how we understand our world. And so the stories I contributed are ones that are you know, important to me, but also very, very common to anyone that's either Iroquois, because 3,500 years ago we were closer to the Iroquois, but then for the Cherokee, that as we went on our own and started developing some of our own stories as well. So when we think about that, you know, this month I want to recognize for the Cherokee people, this is called Boney Month, and you might understand why. It's cold, it's February, we lived in the mountains at higher elevations, and so this is a really, really hungry month, if you will. And so some of these recipes were out of necessity, and they were the nuts that you had laying around, and you really are just trying to usher in the spring. So that's a little bit of the why behind why I still work with this, and I'm very excited to be able to share some of these things. So and when appropriate, then I'm happy to answer any of your questions that you might have.
Amazing. Chamisa, would you please share more about your background and what you'd like to share regarding your work or this project? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Davar. So that's a tough act to follow, but I'm in the beginning steps of my, I guess, like technological journey. Like Davar said, I am also a math teacher, yeah, so one thing I've noticed just in like as I've kind of dipped my toes into technology and coding and building things and contributing is that there's a huge gap between Indigenous knowledge and voices and where technology is today. And so one thing that I am very passionate about is making sure that tribes and Indigenous people don't get left behind and are continuously represented on their own terms. So like Tracy said, it was super important for me to, in this project in particular, contribute stories that are very common and open source in a way that everybody kind of knows how to make mutton stew if you're Navajo. So I wanted to make sure that everything was done in a really ethical way because I think that there's a tendency for technology to kind of take over and go in its own direction. So I'm really, really passionate about giving tribes and Indigenous people the ability and tools to do things on their own terms and determine how technology can help them. And I think this would be a super, this project in particular is a really fun way, especially for tech native like young people to connect to their culture, especially right now because a lot of tribes are in COVID times not open to visitors, and dances and ceremonies and things like that aren't really happening just for safety. So I think that something like this is incredibly useful for people to connect and stay connected to their tribes, and crowdsourcing this type of information with like disclaimers about like this will be used for like public knowledge is super important. So you can build technological education into a project that's directly applicable to Indigenous lives.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And as Tracy said, look forward to learning more from you, even more about your background as a Navajo woman. It would be amazing, because really that is the foundation of why at IVOW we wanted to make sure that we come and find collaborators that would allow us to collaborate together and build something like this together. So at IVOW, we're building AIs that will help journalists, students, teachers, museums, writers formulate articles, reports, and curated experiences, and really a bridge between the living past and the present. So we believe that stories ignite our sense of adventure, give context to history, and help shape the cultural identity of the world around us. And technology obviously shapes how we consume stories, whether it's through radio, television, or podcasting, and AI is yet another tool. When you think about the new tool of conversational AI or voice-assisted AI, these are the blocks that we think are really important. This medium, the medium of conversational AI, allows beautifully for heritage, community, and accessibility to come together. So it's a resource for anyone who's seeking to understand global culture, because they could be standing in their kitchen and they can go to this AI agent and ask to hear about a story from the Navajo Nation, either currently related to food and recipes, but in the future, obviously, you can see how it could be more expansive. Overlooked and underused culturally rich data. The idea of how for a machine to know how to make mutton stew, if that isn't the most profound thing you've heard in the context of what artificial intelligence can do, how we can teach machines to understand how mutton stew was made, and how the three sisters, the story of the three sisters is linked to sustainability and to making sure that we cook with the seasons and understand the generosity of these ingredients to our land and how they make us better guardians of nature, guardians of the earth. So then with community, the idea that personal narratives and private digital records can be accessed by a newer and wider audience. So museums have thousands of incredible digital records that can be presented in a more exciting, accessible, and dynamic way through voice, if they're brought, clustered together through machine learning. And like Chamisa, the next generation of guardianship, who can become engaged with their community, their history, and their tradition. I really believe that this is our moment to pause and consider beneficial AI, and not to only look at startups like myself as, oh, she should just be nonprofit. No, we should be able to come together in an ethical way and make these something that is profitable, because of course, the next generation of Indigenous people, whether they are in Kurdistan or in Wales or in Navajo or Cherokee, will want to engage in these new and dynamic ways with their AIs and their storytellers. And then accessibility around voice obviously is very helpful for elderly, visually impaired, and voice also currently solves that distance issue, which Chamisa talked about. So Tracy, on this particular slide, would you like to add any of your thoughts for a couple minutes?
Sorry, I can't see. Can you hear me or no?
Yes, can you hear you?
So from the heritage perspective, for us, this is sort of what we grow up with, and the thought of how do you share this? Oftentimes it was sort of one-on-one, you know, and quite literally some of the metaphors sort of work. So by fireside chats is where we tell these stories, and we have these congregations where people will sit and you know, we do tribal circles, we do sharing circles, and in those settings, these things are you know, really really personal in nature, because you're having these one-on-few conversations, and the setting is incredible, and you know, you're sharing some of this food. You're sharing sort of you know, we're always sort of busy with our hands making things, because if you think about the way we interact with nature, things like we have something that looks a little bit like bamboo, but it's called river cane, and river cane becomes baskets. River cane becomes sort of weaponry to be able to you know, sustain ourselves with game. And so we're so interconnected with everything around us that this medium all of a sudden allows us to extend this. And throughout really even the last millennia, the end of the last millennia, you know, I spoke to the elders about this, and you know, we really had these years-long debates about, should we share this culture, and then so, for the most part, you know, we're happy to share some of our stories, but not everything, of course, because these are sacred, and people might not understand how sacred something is. Even ginseng for us is a medicine, and we treat it with reverence, and we treat it as, you know, a healing man, so to speak, just as if you translate the way we think about ginseng. So that's what's so important to me, you know, the involvement of heritage within your community, and then using technology to make it more accessible.
Wonderful. And Chamisa, are there any questions that we should go to right away? Or if not, I can keep going.
Yeah, and really quick, I'd like to actually build on Tracy's point about the next generation of guardianship. So kids these days are growing up in a world that's like inundated with new technology every day. So I think it's super key to take opportunities like this to show communities and the younger generation especially, how to maintain a sense of integrity in their own culture, and in a way that they're able to contribute what they know about themselves and what they've seen their entire lives from their family and like grown up in, and figure out how to walk really in two worlds, because that's kind of the world we live in now. So I think there is one question in the chat right now. Is this something that can be used for other cultures, and is it open source? I don't know if Davar or Tracy wants to take that.
I think that we're at the early stage of this, and we absolutely want it to be open source. So we have already reached out to SIPI, which is a university in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and we are looking to create a crowd sourced data set opportunity in May, where people from different backgrounds, Indigenous backgrounds, can go to the platform and add their own stories. So yes, the goal is for this to be open source. The goal for this is to have different cultures in it. I think, to be realistic, we have to make sure that in the next 6 months, we test the Indigenous knowledge graph with the data that we have in it, and train it to be able to understand these different cultural clusters, which goes back to what Victor said in the video, okay? You need to bring in this data to be able to train your models. And then of course you can apply it to any other Indigenous community, absolutely. And so there is another question. Will this platform have access to Indigenous knowledge that's held in existing and established archives such as oral history? This is very important, and Chamisa also addressed this. It's very important to access publicly available information like the oral stories, like the data that already exists on the internet. Absolutely. To be able to create algorithms that can find these stories and be able to transparently acknowledge that these are open source is very important. And then, are you essentially training an AI to be a curator? Yes, we're absolutely training an AI to be a curator, but an interactive one, so that you can be in your kitchen and you can do follow-up questions. So if you want to learn about a Cherokee recipe, you can also, the chatbot will also ask you if you also want to learn the story behind the recipe. We obviously don't want to overpromise. This can be as elaborate or as focused as, you know, it is currently, or it could be growing and be much bigger. This is the moment where we have to come together with like-minded people to make it happen. I think, go ahead, Tracy. Yes.
Sorry, Davar. I just want to sort of add another layer on this. For us, for the Cherokee people, we've had a written language, as I said, for 200 years, and in museums and in shoe boxes and in various storage, anywhere from Ireland to the to London. These stories exist in the Cherokee language, and there's about 2.4 million of these documents that are scattered around. So the use of technology, it took one project I did, it took me a year to translate 40 articles. And it was just too slow, and it just took way too long. So some of the work that this includes, that we can open up, is to tell some of those stories, and in some cases they're very painful stories. They're the stories of being, you know, forced migration across the country in the winter, so they wouldn't even let us do it in, you know, in the summer or spring. And so when you start to think about that, what are the stories that we're not telling? But we have a 3,500-year-old history that are wrapped up in these stories, and for the ones that are appropriate to share with one and all, then that's what's going to add to the sort of the fabric and sort of bring back some of the language that we've lost, because largely it's been translated, or at least gifted from one to another, just through conversation. And so, as we know, you know, something like the whisper game, things change over time, and what we want to do is use technology as well to get back to the original stories, the original words that we have. So I'm very much a fan of this idea that we will embrace technology, and to Chamisa's point, sort of walk in two worlds, because we have to, and that way we are going forward. At the same time, we're honoring our past.
Thank you. So I'm going to continue with the presentation. The idea that at IVOW, our goal is to highlight underrepresented content and to preserve culture. So we currently have 3 AI agents. Hypatia is being built to share stories about women in the field of data and artificial intelligence. So you could be, again, on your couch and want to know about women around the world who are leading data scientists or working in the field of AI. You can learn about them here. You also have Sina. Sina tells stories about festivals from around the world, and IKG, which is the one we're discussing right now, currently sharing stories from Navajo and Cherokee and other indigenous traditions. So in one application, you're able to bring together cultural knowledge in a new and dynamic way. Most importantly, behind it is diverse data set, which again, could be a combination of crowdsourcing new information or being able to find, create algorithms that can search for information that already exists. So I want to go next and talk to you about another example of how this can come into play. So one of my colleagues and I created a prototype for a museum, and the idea here was to bring back a buffalo soldier. So buffalo soldiers in history of the American, and in American history were incredibly important because they were the African American soldiers that actually helped and surveyed the American West. They also were the ones that actually kept the mail coaches safe. You know, they had so many incredible roles in building the American West. And so why couldn't we have an actual Buffalo soldier who could respond to you as a curator? So in this context, you would go to this museum and it says, meet Buffalo soldier Lieutenant Henry Ossian Flipper. He was born into slavery in Georgia on March 21st, and he's the first African-American to graduate from West Point. You could actually chat with this particular AI and be able to meet, you would be able to meet this particular Buffalo soldier. So NISA, in this case, is your personal virtual curator. And that's what earlier came up as well. So this is the architecture of how we're approaching this. It begins with data gathering, it goes into formatting, and then tagging, and then obviously the chatbot platform, which there are various different platforms, and you can decide, you know, which ones that you think are important. I'm just gonna pause on these so that Tracy and Chamisa can also weigh in. For version 1.0, we gathered stories that are either in the public domain or were shared by our cultural experts, and we're obviously looking to crowdsource more stories. And yeah, we are using the relational database Neo4j. This is very important to the foundation of our database. We're not using a database where you're just putting in information and tagging. Neo4j has the beauty of where you can actually show relations between different pieces of data and create clusters of culture, be able to show the relations and how cultures even are the same. You know, so how is it that different festivals happen in the spring? And what are all of the commonalities that cultures have within one another? These are some of the beautiful ways that using Neo4j 5 years from now will allow us to show much more complex ways that we're interwoven in our humanities. Tracy or Chamisa, did you have any thoughts on this particular place? Because this is obviously important.
Yeah, I do. So specifically with the data gathering, we've kind of touched on this a few times throughout this conversation, but I think it serves as an important opportunity for people who aren't necessarily in technology to learn about technology that they use every day anyway, and kind of feel a sense of ownership and again, like a sense of integrity and like what information is going into these types of databases and how things are being contributed. So empowering Native people or Indigenous people of culture across the world to use technology on their own terms is huge here, and something that I don't think can be overstated.
Thank you.
And there's another aspect that I wanted to bring in as well. It's right now, if you think about the historical documents that are easily accessible, who wrote those? And for Indigenous peoples, it isn't, it's overwhelmingly not us. And that's, to Chamisa's point, we really do want to represent this from our own perspective and from the lens of our background. And this then starts to shape where you can where the data is actually sourced from. A good example of this, James Adair had written a book, and it was based off of a Spanish, a series of Spanish letters from the late 1500s. The first sighting of a buffalo, in fact, was in Corpus Christi, Texas, actually, of all places. And so there's this story about how they came in and then they killed like 12,000 deer for the people. And when you start to think through that, it's like, no, it doesn't even make sense. And that's not something that we would do. We would never, slaughter all of our deer and then run out of food. We wouldn't do that. And so the story is, and that was with the first interaction with the Cherokee. If you think about it that way, it's like, that might have been their perspective, but it's certainly not ours. And so what we want to do is just to sort of balance those stories. They're all important, but we at least want to provide some context from the people that were standing there as opposed to the people that heard about the people that might have gone there.
Thank you. Chamisa, are there questions in the chat we should address?
Yeah, there's actually a question right now that asks, what was the rationale for linking this data set to the SDGs?
Yeah, well, it happened that one of the first entities, ITU, the United Nations Division for Information Technology based in Geneva, they're one of the first organizations that embraced us 2 years ago. They invited us to Geneva, and this was after we already had our first cultural AI symposium in Baltimore, Maryland. We had our second cultural symposium on culture and AI and storytelling in Geneva in 2019. And clearly, because we were working with, people in the audience were from UNESCO, leaders from UNESCO, et cetera, we wanted to show the relations to the to the Sustainable Development Goals. And that became the ontology of how we organized the data. It was because we had, an early relationship with them, and it made sense to be able to show how we bring everything back to sustainability. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's actually another one that's a great question. How will you deal with crowdsourcing and the need to map your ontology? This is from Holly Wright in the chat.
Great. So currently we're working on the online form that will be available for adding additional stories. And it's all going to be based on the training that we're doing right now with the currently existing stories. So the stories of the three sisters, for example, that Tracy shared, or Mutton Stew, these were all stories that were written in a certain way, which we'll get to in the next slide. And so we're going to create the online form in the same way so that they are able to enter into the system in an organized way and work with the current ontology. So when it comes to formatting, this is important. So we had recipes and we formatted the recipes to different components. So there was the recipe, the title, the recipe ingredients, as well as instructions for preparation. Stories were formatted to separate out title, author, secondary source, and story source. So this is kind of the back end where you're looking at, imagine a future online form would have these kind of components. So what is the story? What SDG would you relate it to? What are the cultural sources? What is the story? And then the Neo4j, because of the kind of buckets of categories that you've attached to the database, is able to sort through all of this and find the different relations. Is there anything? Yeah, and I guess one thing I wanted to add here on why this is important. I'm going to put in the chat 2 reports that we've done on the current databases that exist out there that are biased. And so I really want you to imagine a future if this does not exist. If this Indigenous knowledge graph does not exist for your cultural backgrounds or for the ones that in your museums, you have so profoundly, curated, then as future more and more products are created, your stories will be forgotten. And what we have currently in mainstream culture that dominates, and in the context of America, I'm just going to exaggerate and say McDonald's and, fast food and, entertainment, and all of the ways that entertainment and culture are amplified in ways that don't have cultural sources attached to them. It'll be even worse in the age of automation. Please, please take this very seriously. And that's why we're so thrilled to be speaking to an audience of, people who are very much concerned about the ancient and historical context of data and information and knowledge. So, this is an example of the Three Sisters story. Again, how do you tag it? And also, how do you create a short story for the AI to be able to share it in voice? Chamisa, are there any questions?
There's actually one. So Helen is wondering how we are going to use imagery, like the photo showing the Three Sisters, excuse me, sorry, to add a visual aspect to the voice assistant.
Yeah, so everything that gets put into the database, you can add a field for image, video, or audio, and that is also allowed, the agent can also pick that up. It's all in the coding. It's very simple. So you've all heard of push notifications. So this agent is able to send you a push notification with an image, with an audio, with a video file, and that's very easily done. So in terms of the chatbot platform, we've selected Dialogflow. We did a lot of research on this, and we looked into IBM Watson. There are other platforms out there, and we decided to go with Dialogflow, which is Google-based, and it's only because of the massive amounts of training data that also exists, again, not in the context of indigenous knowledge, but in the larger context of APIs that are out there that we could be able to attach ourselves to, not just for this agent, but the other storytelling agents that we're creating. As we said, currently, these are edited manually by our journalists, but the iteration of the indigenous knowledge graph that currently exists is completely automated through our database in Neo4j. So if you went to Google, you would find one of our storytellers. This is Sina Storyteller, a very limited beta where you could ask Sina about famous women in history. You could also ask Sina to tell you about our culture graph. This is a way that you for yourself can test very early stages of Sina. Again, with the caveat that it's early days, but it's very exciting. I see that there may be some more questions.
Not yet, just the ones we've talked about so far.
Okay, let me pause here and see if we can. I'm going to stop sharing for a while and just hand it over to Tracy and you, Chamisa, maybe to talk a little bit about the concept of oral storytelling, which is obviously such a rich tradition in Navajo and Eastern Band Cherokee tradition, and why even we're thinking about the idea of bringing oral storytelling to voice. Maybe we could talk about that a little bit. So if you want, Chamisa, I would love to hear from you. I know your grandma is a storyteller. So just maybe talk to us a little bit about your background, having been raised in a Navajo family. I would love to hear from you.
Yeah, so like Davar said, I'm Navajo, Blackfeet, and Shoshone Bannock, and specifically raised with my Navajo side. And I come from a family of storytellers, writers, and just general, like many people, cultural like experts. So I've been very lucky to always be around this knowledge and kind of learning my own, learning how to build my own knowledge into the things that I'm given. So I think, like I kind of said before, as far as storytelling goes, I think there's a huge gap and opportunity, especially in technology, to include these new kind of like technological and cultural identities in what we have, or like what we're building for the future. So I know for me, a lot of the stories that I've been given and told and heard, a lot of them aren't shareable necessarily, just out of respect for the knowledge holders that give those to us, because it's part of our identity and part of like how we connect with the world around us, and a source of strength and that we give to each other. But that being said, I know there are stories and that everybody knows about, and that I know are okay to share, as far as the open source stuff goes. So I think that as we learn how to tell stories, like going into the future, we do have to be aware of what we are able to share, and really share those bits of ourselves with pride and figure out ways to incorporate them into this new technological world, while also like maintaining our own sense of integrity or, and identity with the stories that we've been given. So it's a balance that I think, especially for projects like this, you have to tap into individuals and I guess groups of people that are ready to have this type of conversation. And slowly but surely, like I think some more people are like willing to have a more technologically like forward-looking conversation. But yeah, I hope that kind of
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a question here from Antonia on how are Indigenous people responding to the use of AI and telling their stories? Are they part of the development? And I think, you know, I want to share that this is a project that has been in the making for the past year and a half. We have, from the onset, worked with Victor Yarlett of the Crow Tribe of Montana, who's an AI specialist in the development of this project. And I'll let Tracy respond, but he has invited us to present our Indigenous Knowledge Graph to the main engineering event that happens with Native communities. Around 2,500 people will be joining in September. So that is an honor. And I think that you have to make sure that you are very inclusive from the beginning, and that you honor the knowledge that is being shared, but you also acknowledge that it's publicly available knowledge, that, you know, we're not at all talking about Indigenous knowledge in the context of what Tracy and Chamisa have both talked about, which is that information that is sacred and private. That's not what we're accessing with this tool. But let me have Tracy respond to that. And then please feel free to add more of your questions so that we can take the next 10 minutes after this and really get into some of your questions. Tracy?
Yes, thanks. So I definitely echo and support what Chamisa said, and we've had to navigate. I mean, the way I think about it is, I had to navigate these waters, if you will, you know, basically 4 decades ago. And the conversations then were with the elders, where, as I started saying, this could be a tool where we could ensure that our language persists, for, another. In our case, our language is about 3,500 years old. And so I wanted it to have a future. And so there were a lot of, and I do mean all night, discussions with elders. And in fact, the event that Davar was mentioning is the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, where we'll actually sit in a large circle, could be as many as 100 people having this discussion, and we will talk through everything from everyone's view that has a viewpoint that wants to share it. And so we talk about all of these things, how we don't want to give away a culture, and there's things that are private. I'll mention something, that there's like a go into water ceremony. There is no way that will ever be publicly available, because it's part of a ritual that that happens for us, and it's very private. It's not unlike living in a large family, and there's stories that you can tell, and there's stories that you cannot tell. You'll be ostracized from the family if you do. So there's that division in all of us, and so that's why the sensitivity that we show and the discretion that we show here means that we were raised appropriately. And we very much understand sort of the things that cross lines, and we don't want to share outside of that. And so this idea of permission is very, very strong for us. So that's a way of thinking about it.
Thank you so much. Daria asked the question that they work with the Wikimedia movement, open source. There's also Wikidata, which can help build knowledge graphs. We want to include Indigenous knowledge, although that's hard as it pushes against the Western encyclopedic frame of knowledge. Have you thought about Wikimedia for your project? Is it at all useful for feeding into your project, or as a place to deposit your content? So I think that we are being very cautious as we move forward, and we understand that in these kinds of technology applications, that you have to take your time and be patient. So that's what we're doing. To answer your question, we've done some analysis of Wikipedia in particular, and in the context of women, as you know, that there is a gender bias where many of the terms associate males with science and technology and women with the arts. And so we just want to be careful not to deposit this information in a place where is already struggling. And I don't know how to explain that more than to say we're being cautious on where we deposit the content. So we've teamed up with Topcoder. Topcoder has 1.6 million data scientists and developers around the world, and we're doing our crowdsourcing of data through Topcoder. And that data is going into Neo4j currently, but I understand why it would be great for it to also be somewhere where, for example, in Wikimedia or Wikidata. So these are all part of conversations that we're having, and we'll be happy to talk to you more about that. Any other questions? If not, we could continue. And I thank you so much. This is all very helpful. If you have any other supportive ideas on how we could collaborate with one another, I think that would be really helpful. We are looking at getting sponsors to come in as we build the Indigenous Knowledge Graph, and the information for sponsorship is right here. I'm just going to put it in the document so you can see it. It's gives you a sense of how we could be early collaborators together on this project. if, you know, if the thinking meshes and is relevant. So going back to our presentation and our workshop, we're next going to talk about cultural data and why it matters in the bigger picture. So far, we've been talking about everything in the context of making sure that we're preserving culture, right? But here, let's look at this. So 2020 ushered in massive interest in home cooking because of the COVID-19 virus. The United States National Restaurant Association predicts that AI, virtual assistants, and hyper-personalization will be a major disruptor of the food industry by 2030. But guess what? We don't have enough diverse data on food. So there's a lot of incredible information out there, of course, where you can, you know, curbside pick up any kind of food, but do machines really understand the stories behind those foods? People love the idea of getting to know stories about their food. So it's important when we gather this information that we also recognize that we're filling in the gap of AI content for underrepresented groups and cultures, both in the availability and in bias. So right now, our mode of delivery is like an Alexa-like offering, right? But as somebody else just pointed out, this content in itself is also very important and valuable. Consumers are demanding and wanting to engage in stories about their food. You see this, of course, on Instagram everywhere. And there is an interest in ethnic cuisine and cross-cultural mashup. It's one of the top food trends of 2020. So this is important because we're not just grounding our ambitions in creating this in preservation of knowledge, but also in the fact that consumers want this and are craving to have more interactive engagements with their food. So take the example again of one of our AI agents, Sina, that is available on Google Assistant. So Sina can suggest recipes and news from the world of food in real time, and available, you know, like we said on Google Home. We presented this as part of the 2020 AI for Good Summit. NASA also invited us to bring Sina in for the International COVID Challenge because Sina was sharing stories about the origins of the coronavirus. And believe it or not, one of the famous scientists who even discovered the coronavirus was a woman. Busy millennials are looking for an interactive way to get a recipe and to stay up to date on the world of food. So here is a user experience. Megan Griffiths is preparing a holiday dinner for her in-laws, and she wants to surprise them with dishes from their childhood. Her husband is Navajo and she's from Wales. Mrs. Griffith has access to Sina Storyteller through Google Home, so she asks Sina to recommend some recipes. Sina will help her find the right recipe and send her a push notification with more relevant information. So why don't we pause right now also to see if any of you have any other questions. And I wanted to ask if it's okay with the organizers for all of us, if we wanted to open our videos and just be able to see one another and, you know, introduce yourselves. We'd love to just know more about you, who's in the room. If we could do that for the next 15 minutes, I think it would be very beneficial to learn more about you. So I see Roberta is here. Holly, you asked several questions. Feel free to tell us more about yourself. Maria. And if you're not able to show your video, that's okay. Maybe you could just share more about your background and your interest in our workshop. Holly, do you want to go? Or Emily, feel free to go, Emily.
Oh, hi. There's just so much to think about here. I'm involved in lots of different projects at the moment, working with Historic England on thinking about how they can think ahead for their records, at national level in England, but I'm also involved in projects in Wales, and I've done research on fieldscapes and the relationship between landscape and food in the prehistoric period. So really varied.
Yeah, that's incredible. And so far, has anything that we've shared spoken to you in terms of how you could organize ancient information? That might be interesting to just hear from you. Or
to be honest, I was just tapping into the chat that there's just so much to think about. I'm processing it. I'm really honored that you guys have contributing all this knowledge, and it's slightly overwhelming. You've just thought about this stuff so carefully. So audio, the power of AI, I think, is something that traditional record managers need to really start addressing. So yeah, that's as much as probably I should say.
Okay, yes. Holly?
Hi, I'm Holly Wright, and I work for the Archaeology Data Service, and we are embedded in the Department of Archaeology at the University of York. So despite my accent, I am actually in the north of England right now. I've done, I'm incredibly interested in this, partly because I've been working with linked open data for quite a while, and I have been working to try to, actually recently submitted an EU project that just missed being funded, trying to do something incredibly similar to what you have been doing in terms of trying to understand ways that we can capture especially intangible heritage using linked open data, and hence my question about how are you actually engaging with people who need to actually map to your ontology, because that's the thing that we've really struggled with, even with archaeologists who are researchers, and they understand the archaeology, but they don't understand linked open data, and they don't need to, and they shouldn't need to. How do we get them to bring their domain knowledge in a way that, in a respectful way that allows them to contribute, but doesn't necessarily make them feel like they've got to learn the technology side of it.
Yeah.
I've got tons of questions, tons of things I could ask.
Yeah, we're gonna go to maybe Tiva, Claire, others who want to share, but my professor of journalism, Miguel Gandert, way back many years ago when I was a journalist, he ended up having a remarkable career documenting the American Southwest, and he has gifted us his entire photographic collection of the American Southwest. And we are now putting in Neo4j Miguel's entire body of work around Indo-Hispanic culture. And it's so powerful because it's images, but then we also work with him on the stories and the tagging. And this is all being we're creating the ontology around it. So I think that we're really interested in the idea of conversational AI that takes dormant powerful historical cultural data and knowledge and organizes it to make it accessible for public engagement. Let's see, did anyone else want to introduce themselves? And also if Tracy and Chamisa have any questions for you in terms of their work.
Hi.
Hi.
I don't have a video, so
no worries
with me, but my name is Antonia Onyahelam, and I work at Aberystwyth University in Wales here, in a project that is called GEOM. It's called Geographical Earth Observation and Monitoring Project. It's I work as Earth Observation and the GIS scientist in a team of I think we're about 10 people in the team. So it's an EU-funded project. What we usually do is that we support small businesses and organizations within the Wales in kind of information technology, GIS and mapping and development of platforms, similar to what you're kind of showing to us now. So really, I've attended this conference last year, and I kind of ordinarily would have had a stand, an exhibition stand, if we did it physically, but this year we are not. So what I'm really interested in is to kind of looking for companies or organizations within Wales that would kind of benefit from the support we give, because we give kind of 3 to 6 months free support to develop platforms similar to what you're doing, what you have, and a lot more than that, that use GIS and mapping technologies and all the range of artificial intelligence and analysis kind of tools for businesses. So yeah, so I'm kind of like really just seeing who we can engage with in terms of organizations, businesses, and those kind of things that would benefit from the support we give, because we do offer that support free of charge, and just need to be within the Wales zone to benefit from it. Or if you are not within Wales,
yes,
collaboration with a Wales organization, we can support technologically any kind of project that you have an interest in.
awesome. Can you put your information in the chat? That would be great. Just your email and then your website so that everybody can have a way of reaching you.
I will do that.
Thank you. Anyone else want to share? Or maybe in the last 20 minutes or so that we have, I just wondered if there's a emphasis that you wanted us to focus on, because we're happy to sort of tailor this last 20 minutes on what would be beneficial, or if Tracy and Chamisa have any ideas on things that you still would like to share or collaborations you might like to see.
Yeah, I do want to speak a little bit while people are thinking about what they might want out of the last pieces of this. The ontology aspect. One of the things that I consider sort of a super strength is sort of creativity. And for me, I grew up obviously I look very Caucasian, but I definitely grew up with a tribe and have a home there, et cetera. And so one of the things I've had to deal with is sort of living in both my father's Caucasian and my mother's Cherokee. And so I had to reconcile this from a very early age. In doing that, what I came up with is sort of this idea that the perspectives of each of the cultures, and we also grew up in Appalachia, which has its own craziness. And if you want to watch American TV, there's all kinds of shows about moonshine or whatever. So effectively, I came up in 3 cultures, and then traveled the world and shared these things, and so I've had to do this reconciliation. When it comes to ontology, there's obviously structured frameworks like time, for instance. What's important about this is how you can combine these things, and not everything is going to fit with everything else, and that's the beauty of the design. We came up with by framing it as a recipe that was just a way of starting, but then as Victor and Chamisa and I were talking, because we lived this, we understood that everything's just kind of in a circle. So for those stories, if you were to take my ontology of this, independent of others, it would end up just being a giant circle, because the 3 sisters comes back around. And I can get into a lot more rich territory, but for the purposes of this, it needed to be framed in. The other aspect of this is I don't want to sort of get rid of voices that are dissenting voices. What's really important to tribal communities, that sort of every voice has value, and we respect that. So when I mention a circle of 100 people, that might be a 5, 6, 7 hour event. And we even have a concept of Grand Council, which is days long, where everyone can speak. And the difference is, I established an organization, Indigenous within Microsoft, and for us engineers, the way we conduct our meetings is, even if there's a dissenting voice, we have to work really hard to include the point behind find the dissenting voice. We have to include that voice, even if it's contrary to everything else that others are saying. So we're balancing this idea of groupthink with the value of dissent within this. And it's not that it already is, sort of hierarchical in nature, just by the way societies work. But that's our value system, and so you get that by being raised in it. And yeah, I've got, I call them crazy cousins. I got them all over the place, but as a child, I still love them, and I grew up, and they were important to the way I think and my acceptance of these ideas that I knew at 8 years old are just batshit crazy, just really not appropriate at all. And so, but there are people that have raised me, and there are people that are still very much the same, and I value their perspectives in as much as ones that align with me. So,
yeah, thank you so much. Because this is a workshop, we 1000% are going to give you homework, because that's how workshops are. So I'm going to share my screen to share what we're leaving you with. And it would be great if we just talk about that if you have any questions. So just a second, I'm going to get ready to share my screen again. And we can just walk through this assignment, and then I can share it with you as well. Yes, please.
I've just got one question, which there's obviously a lot of philosophical challenges to do with ontology and the complexity of addressing these diverse and often conflicting perspectives. But it strikes me that one of the challenges is that AI and the pace of these changes in the digital environment are just moving so quickly. And I wondered if you wanted to speak to that tension between the need to be considered and thoughtful and the sort of pace of these developments that sometimes just overtaking all of that.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's the same thing. Do you want to wake up 10 years from now? Oh, sorry. Do you want to wake up 10 years from now and see the yellow signs of McDonald's in AI? Or do you want to wake up 10 years from now and have Tracy and Chamisa's heritage and your Welsh heritage be the ontology foundation of what you're creating for, anything, health, wellness, etc. So Stephen Hawking, before he passed, and you could read this, he said, we need to pause for beneficial AI. And I think we need to raise our hands and say that we're really happy that industry is moving so fast, but we also need to pause and make sure that we're making all these considerations. And to be honest, like Tracy works for Microsoft. So, Tracy is doing some projects, through Microsoft AI for Good, that allow him to be able to pursue some of this work, right? Because a big organization like Microsoft is behind him. So some of this work is going to get done, but it's because of Tracy, right? And a few others potentially who are like supporting him. So we have to create these opportunities around big industry organizations as well as museums, so that we can bring together like-minded people to say it's okay to pause. It's okay to look at what is lacking. That would be kind of how I quickly answer that. Tracy, did you want to, or Chamisa, also respond to that?
I'll just throw in a model of signal to noise, and right now there's the volume comes out of just the places that are loudest, which is kind of a circular argument, but for that, then is the signal different versus is it just part of the noise? And what we have to do is sort of value the signal along with acknowledging the noise. And it is a noisy and chaotic world, and people tend, we're all human. So we all have bias, and we all have to sort of fight those instincts, and appeal to our better angels, so to speak. So I mean, this is a much, much larger topic. And if you want to show up in Phoenix in September 23rd through the 25th, you can sit in circle and we can talk about this as well. So anyway, that's just the way we do it. And it's exhausting, but it also is very, very therapeutic and cleansing, and everyone's on equal footing. So that's what's great about it.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen about our little homework assignment. So we think that it would be wonderful if you go back to your own projects and you think about the workshop, the concept of a cultural engine. What would your cultural engine look like? So the major areas would be obviously looking at getting data and having cultural experts to annotate it, using AI techniques to generate features around it, and making this data available for others to use. So this is sort of a very basic elemental architecture of a cultural engine. And that's what we have for whether it's Indigenous Knowledge Graph or Hypatia, the stories on women, or SINA, the stories on festivals. So there is a cultural data that is being gathered. There's audio, text, images that cultural experts are providing, but also annotating. And then there's AI techniques that's being generated to apply, right, to the information that's coming in. And then you're sharing it in a public way for others to use. This could be putting the content in Wikidata, like somebody suggested, Daria. Right? It doesn't have to be through an AI agent. You can share it in another way. So I can obviously send this to Susan and Reina and David, the organizers, so that you have access to this. But any questions, and I'll try to make this bigger so you could see, any questions regarding the idea of workshopping your own cultural engine? So the second is design your own conversational AI character. So chatbots or conversational AI are virtual assistants that live on websites, apps, tablets, and function primarily as a communications and marketing tool for businesses, but a new generation of character chatbots is coming. How would you design a conversational AI to explore your history, your heritage, or your data? How could a hero, a legend, or ancestor inspire the character of a bot? And as you think about this future of storytelling, think about what kind of cultural chatbot you will design for your museum, your art galleries, your family websites, your community centers. So whether you're an educator, a diplomat, an artist, a museum owner, how can an AI character help you share your story or educate your network? What 20 questions would you want your AI to respond to? And what local hero or heroine or legend or ancestor can inspire that character? These are really incredible ways where you can actually take something very tangible from what all of us have presented here and be able to take it back to your networks and discuss and brainstorm. So we're happy to be able to also share that with you through this workshop. I don't know if Susan is on here, if there's anything else you'd like us to focus on. We're happy to give back 20 minutes of your time if nobody has any other questions. And I wanted to give the last few minutes over to Tracy and Chamisa if they wanted to share any final reflections. My heritage is Bakhtiari, Kurdish, Scots-Irish. So my ancestors, the Ardalans, come from thousands of years in the Kurdish regions of Iran and Iraq and Syria. Kurds are the largest indigenous community without a country. I think there's 25 million Kurds, and they're grouped around different countries around the world. But Kurds have, incredible ancestry, and my family tree goes back 1,000 years. It's in my living room, and I know who my great, 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 great grandfather and mother were. I honor that. I think that we're only going to become better guardians of everything, not just nature, but our world, if we honor our past and we have ways that we can show how the past is going to inform our future. So my Kurdish background is from my dad, and then from my mom's side, it's Bakhtiari. These are the tribes, that migratory tribe in the south central part of Iran. My grandfather came to Harlem, to New York City in 1919 with the purpose of becoming a doctor. He met my grandmother, who was a nurse there, and that's our Iranian American story, how it all began in Ellis Island 100 years ago. So yeah, I feel very close to making sure that the future technologies include and honor our heritage. Any final thoughts from you, Chamisa, and then Tracy?
Yeah, just really quick. I just wanted to say thank you for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to get to talk about this type of work with like-minded people who are also doing incredible work on their own cultures and in their own spaces. So yeah, thank you. Thank you all for being here.
Tracy?
Yeah, thanks, Davar, and thanks, Chamisa. So this for me has been like I said, you know, I will call it infected early on, and so the reconciliation of these things, whether it's the use of technology and ancient technology. So if you sort of have to address these questions and whether or not it's appropriate. The thing I go with is something like any useful tool can be used for great things. It also can be used for bad things. And that's just the nature of humanity. So when I think through the notion of does this fit? Does ancient technology, ancient stories, do they actually fit along with technology? It's an emphatic yes, because we're hundreds of years, and in some cases thousands of years for many constructs, able to tell our stories, but they're largely inaccessible. And that's really hard to even grasp, given how much stuff there is flying around us, and you can push a button here and get to a lifetime of reading if you want. So the aspect of is this important do they go together is with certainty in my head. When I saw our own language sort of diminish in my lifetime, and then people with advanced degrees from my tribe couldn't read and write our own language, or they maybe could speak it or speak a little bit of it, it really bothered me. My mom's a good example of this. She has her PhD. The first lady to get a PhD off the res. And so it's like there's someone that's so gifted and is a teacher, et cetera, and still with us at 86 years old, and still strong. So just stay out of her way is what I'm going to tell you. It's pretty amazing that what she instilled in me is the importance of the culture. But then as I started talking to her about AI things, she was kind of open-minded about it. And when I talk to elders about this, they're apprehensive about it until I say the following thing. Back in the day, steel, as in metal, is a technology. It's an important technology. And let's say you can make a hatchet, and with a hatchet, you can build yourself a community. You can that you can keep you and sustain you and others throughout history. You can make art with it. You can do all kinds of things, and you can also use it to bash somebody over the head. So when it comes to any useful technology, you're always going to have this tension between use for good versus not. And the more of us that are out there that can actually sort of say, let's use this for the right reasons in the right way to balance out as we know, there's no shortage of people that want to use it inappropriately. And so what we provide is sort of these voices that need to be valued, and doing the good work and leading by example. And for us, putting this out and sharing it with you is just simply a way of saying it matters that we use this appropriately, and AI for good is a worthy cause. It doesn't mean that AI won't be used inappropriately, and it is being used appropriately. We know this, but also I don't want to walk away from the technology because it is such a rich way of all of us going forward. So that's what I wanted to sort of leave you with. And I appreciate your time and appreciate you listening. And for us, we don't have a word for goodbye in Cherokee, but we do have a phrase that kind of says, until I see you again. So it's Dono daga gohan'i. Chiki.
Thank you so much. And we would say bisalamat, which means in good health.
In Diné, we say hagonet. That's see you later, see you soon.
What would you say, Mallory, in Welsh?
Yeah, diolch yn fawr. What we would say for in Welsh, how would we say? We would probably say hwyl am y tro, something like that. So again, I'll just take this opportunity to thank the panelists for such a fabulous workshop. I've learned a heck of a lot. I can see so much potential here. It's absolutely fabulous work. And I hope all the attendees as well have taken something from this workshop. Diolch yn fawr iawn i'r panelwyr am sesiwn gwych anhygoel. Wi wedi dysgu lot, a wi'n gobeithio bod chi yn y gynulleidfa hefyd wedi dysgu llawer hefyd. Dyna ddiwedd y gynhadledd gorffennol digidol y Comisiwn am Eleni. A felly gobeithio bod chi gyd wedi mwynhau, a gobeithio gweld ni chi y flwyddyn nesaf. That brings the Digital Past Conference to a close after a week long of events, sessions, workshops, and the conference on Wednesday. I hope you've all enjoyed and taken many things from it, from the different sessions. It's been fabulous to have you join us from different parts of the world. Realize that some people got up very early and stayed up very late for certain sessions. Again, so we hope you've enjoyed. Thank you very much. Davar, hwyl am y tro. Bye for now.
Bye.